Police discover 80 Russian torture chambers in Ukraine.
Here's a summary of the article.
Ukrainian law enforcement officers have discovered 80 Russian torture chambers and captivity places within their occupied areas. The relevant statement was made by Ukrainian Internal Affairs Deputy Minister Katerina Pavlichenko during a meeting with Alice Jill Edwards, the UNSpecial Rapporteur on Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, an Ukrinform correspondent reports, referring to the Ukrainian Internal Affairs Ministry. A large part of Ukrainian territories have been occupied. But, in their occupied areas, captivity places and torture chambers were discovered, where civilians had been illegally held and tortured. The police have found 80 of such places so far, in the Kharkiv, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Kyiv and Sumy regions, Pavlichenko told. In her words, investigators have recently come across another torture chamber in the Kyiv region's Bucha. On March 3–7, 2022, Russian soldiers illegally held 151 people there. We cannot forget that many servicemen and rescuers are still in Russian captivity. Their relatives do not have proper access to information about their confinement conditions. There are also civilians in Russian captivity. In fact, they are hostages. All these issues require special attention of the international community, Pavlichenko stressed. According to Pavlichenko, the National Police of Ukraine opened more than 80,000 criminal proceedings over the crimes committed by Russian troops in Ukraine.
This post received a score of 8,300, with an upvote ratio of 96%. Here are the top comments in response to this article.
The National Police of Ukraine opened more than 80,000 criminal proceedings over the crimes committed by Russian troops in Ukraine. This is in the deoccupied areas of Ukraine. A big part of Ukraine is still under the Russian terrorists' control.
I was going to say this is probably only 5% of the land that has been occupied. So the rest will be worse.
Mariupol is going to be an opera of nightmares once liberated. Fuck Russia.
Russia erected a structure to block the view of the Mariupol theater while they removed the rubble and bodies. Guess they thought it might look bad removing hundreds of children's and women's bodies from the largest known air raid shelter in the city.
A historical theater, nonetheless. Destroying local heritage while also killing women and children? Now that's one hell of a war crime.
Cultural genocide.
What this just reminded me of, in a nutshell, justice, I guess. We read about Putin's crimes or those of people around him. Figuring out who was responsible for torturing and other war crimes sounds interesting in the sense that this is not just persecuted later on as a general Russian special operation, further also tracking down a certain amount of people actively committing those war crimes. So essentially, hundreds or thousands having to testify in front of a court, not just Russia paying for this later.
Nuremberg-style crimes lead to Nuremberg-style trials.
We can only hope. The lessons of Nuremberg sorely need to be retaught, firmly.
And very publicly.
This is what the anti-war crowd who claim Ukraine and its backers are warmongers refuse to acknowledge. There is no negotiating with sadists like this because they are incapable of negotiating in good faith. Hell, they do this to their own civilians for having the audacity to speak out against the regime. They only come to the table when they have no better alternatives, and even then that's not a guarantee.
How the lesson of appeasement wasn't learned in 1939, I'll never know.
The morons who want a peace deal with the Rashists now were the same types who said, "Why die for Danzig?"
Horrifying.
Please be aware that children are among the victims of these torture chambers. The UN has already published reports of the torture and murder of children by Russian forces, and these reports are agreed to by governments and groups throughout the world who are in political opposition to one another, including left-wing and right-wing administrations. Soldiers do not spontaneously build similar torture chambers and use the same torture practices en masse by coincidence. We have no way to know that innocent civilians and children are not continuing to be tortured and murdered in occupied territories, or that the kidnapped children are not currently facing any number of horrors in Russia.
This video was automatically created by Reddit to speech. The article and comments in this video were selected from Reddit according to their upvotes, and any paraphrasing was performed by smmry.com, without any human intervention.